G'day guys, Tills20 here and welcome back to Oceania. Guys, you did it! You got Oceania to the very front page of the Steam Workshop. I was there for 4 days. There's over 15,000 of you guys subscribed to it. It's crazy. It's so nice to know that so many of you are enjoying the map, and please let me know if you are building anything on it. Send me some screenshots. You can follow me on Twitter, DM me. I'd love to see what you guys are building. For me, all I have built so far in terms of the city are these squiggly roads going all over the place, and that's pretty much it. Today we're going to be doing much of the same, but doing a lot of big planning, so figuring out where some big things are going to go within the city. We're going to be looking where the Central Park's going to go and where universities and highways. In fact, highways are going to be the main feature for today, but like the title suggests, it's going to be a lot about roads and just talking about how roads are kind of interesting. Now, I was inspired to do this episode from like a very mundane part of my life, and that's driving home from work. On the drive home from work, I drive over a bridge that's called the Gladesville Bridge in Sydney. It stretches over a pretty large body of water. It's not exactly a spectacular bridge, it's pretty much just a highway. You do get some pretty nice views of the city when you're driving to the city, but it's like nothing hugely special. I don't really think too much about it when I drive over it. But the other day I was driving over it and I noticed on the water that there is this bricky, concretey area that sort of looked like where an old bridge was. And I was like, I bet that's what the old Gladesville Bridge was, and they've just replaced it with this new modern one. So sure enough, when I went home, I jumped on the computer and was flying around in Google Earth, and there I noticed that this totally did look like where the bridge used to be. And sure enough, I did a little bit of research. I found this awesome website that I'm going to be referencing a lot today. And this site has a whole bunch of different historical maps of Sydney, and they're all aligned really nicely, so you can actually see how the city has changed from, I think the earliest one is 1943, and it goes all the way up until about 2015. And then I pretty much just spent all afternoon just looking at how Sydney has changed as highways have been introduced. And we don't have a huge amount of highways in Sydney, but there are still highways. You can still see where they've been placed around the city for what reasons. You can see how roads have been upgraded. You can see where they've just completely demolished areas, and it's just really interesting to see the thought process and the ideas behind those changes and what's been left behind. This poor old Gladesville Bridge is no longer here anymore. We've got this big bridge, it's still nice, miss the old one. You know, there's a lot of things that change, a lot of things that you can imagine what would be there if highways weren't there. And I kind of wanted to dedicate this episode to it, show how the city has grown over time. My version, my city that I'm building here, still got no name for it. If you've got any names for the city, hit me up. But yeah, what are we gonna change? So that's what you can see me doing. I'm starting to introduce some highways and think about where they are going to be rolling around the city. And I don't want to do huge amounts of highways like I have in the past. I think a lot of my cities have been, very much inspired by American cities that have way more highways than we do in Australia. But I did want to tackle this in a really different way to how I usually build highways. So we are destroying old roads that I have already established. You can see that I already went through the farmland at the very beginning of this episode, and I've actually changed the path of the highway coming in. And I've done that because I think in terms of perspective and scale, it feels like a bigger city, and it feels like a longer windy road when the road is windy and goes in and out of mountains and hills and around rivers. Whereas the old version just went straight towards the city, and it has less of a larger scale feel, if that makes sense. And I also plan to put a town out this way at some point, and the highway's now going to bypass the town. Because most highways will do that. They bypass these towns that sit on the old roads that go into the city. So we'll have an old road stretching into the city, which you probably can already see within some of these shots. And then the highway is stretching in what was probably less of a developed area. I also built just a little tiny section of highway. It goes into a tunnel that's going to stretch to the city via this tunnel and connect up with the interchange that I plan to build to a little closer to the city. And then this highway is going to snake around this river, go underneath this bridge, and connect up to what I want to have a pretty messy interchange. The biggest one will be kind of more towards the outer skirts of the city. And I've also just tried to work on this rail line that was just sitting on a crazy gradient, so I had to fix that up a bit. So I've just made it a little bit more of a smoother incline, and I've also got this really nice raised brick area that I think is going to be a really cool area. I want this whole area that I'm working on just there to be like a pretty industrial type of area. And now we're gonna start working on where like the Central Park's gonna sit. So, you know, the road layout at the moment does look pretty well established, and it sort of looks like a big city at this stage. But you have to sort of factor in that there's going to be these big areas like a giant park and a university and golf courses and cemeteries. There's a lot of places, a lot of things within cities that take up large blocks of land, and I need to factor all that in because I do want to have all the main parts of a city within this. So I did need to factor in these really big, large blocks. And this big park is definitely one of the largest ones. I haven't really done a massive central park in any of my cities before, and I think it's probably because I've never really factored it in beforehand. So this is where it's going to sit. I've also got a campus area, but I don't know if this is where the university is exactly going to go. But I do sort of like that it's right next to the park. I think it sort of makes sense in a way, taking up big blocks of land. And then all the way around this river, I would like to either be housing or we'll have some nice parkland that sits under here. So, you know, a bit more bushy around this area, definitely more out of the city. And that's sort of why we've got this highway. You know, it's probably one of the better locations for that highway to snake around, get traffic in and out. But yeah, it also goes underground for quite a long period of time, mostly under the more high density areas. Something that I'm being really conscious of with this city is I want everything to look nice from very early on. So it's all great that the map looks pretty well detailed in terms of vegetation and terraforming, but around the city, I do want a lot of the areas to be somewhat of how I want it to look. Even if I plan to change it later on down the track, at least parts of it are going to be pretty detailed. So I am going through and making sure that these areas surrounding the city are somewhat detailed in terms of vegetation. So I have created a bit of a mound over there. It's a little hill that I'm going to probably keep quite naturey. We could put something around there, maybe some houses, but for this time being, it's just a bit more detailed rather than just looking pretty ugly. And I want to do the same for the Central Park. So this isn't how the Central Park's going to look, but you know, it's sort of nice to put, I don't know, 3 minutes into just making it a little bit detailed, a couple of windy roads and some trees aligned, and that way you have a bit of an idea of how it looks in the context of a city. And then, you know, maybe in like a month when I get closer to that area and I go, oh, you know what? Maybe this isn't a great place for the Central Park. I can move it, and I'm going to have a bit more context because I've had something already sitting there for a while. And you know, these central parks, these large areas, usually pretty well established very early on in a city. You know, they plan for these areas, and you know, I want to do the same thing. I want to plan for these areas very early on. Now we're starting to work on the main highway that's going to be stretching into the city. And this was such a challenge because we've already got some very pre-existing roads, and I didn't want to just completely demolish all of them. You know, I don't want to just completely change my road layout purely for this highway. So the first way of approaching this was I saw this main road that was going into the city, and I thought, you know, I reckon this was probably upgraded to a highway. I think that would probably make the most amount of sense. So I started creating the highway along that road, and you can see now it's starting to like connect up to where the bridge is going to be. And I thought, okay, well, this is a perfect spot for like a big interchange, but you know, trying to keep it a little bit more discreet. We'll probably have some houses that, well, not houses, but some buildings that sit alongside it, and it's going to be really condensed compared to the one that's going to sit further out in the city. But you know, big interchange nonetheless. Especially we need traffic going. We need a highway going towards the airport, which will get a lot of traffic as well. But yeah, just laying down the foundations of where I want that interchange to go. But I also wanted to use tunnels a lot more than I usually would within City Skylines. I don't usually like doing stuff underground, mostly because it's underground and I can't see it. So I sort of feel like it's a bit of a waste. That's why I never build metros, because, you know, I sort of feel like, well, what's the point? You can't see it, it's underground. I like to be able to see what I'm building. So I don't usually do tunnels, but I sort of thought in the context of this and also in the spirit of Sydney, then some tunnels would make sense. We have a lot of tunnels within Sydney. There's not a lot of highways that actually even surface around the city. A lot of them are within tunnels. They peak up every now and again, but mostly these highways sit underneath the city. Mind you, Sydney is one of the most undrivable cities on the planet. It is such an incredibly bad city to drive in. So much traffic, no parking. I won't make things as bad for my Sims. I will try and make it a drivable city and something that is working like somewhat well, and we'll see how we go. But that's another thing I'm going to be doing is I'm just laying down the foundations for a lot of this. We're not going to be building any interchanges in one go. I'm very much going to be placing down the ideas of what I want to do, and then when we get to that area, then we'll add in the ramps. Or even when there's a demand, you know, if we start seeing a lot of traffic getting banked up in an area, then I'll go and add in a ramp. Whereas a lot of the time in my other projects, I've just been sort of tackling things in blocks. But I don't really want to do that in this series. I want to do things when the situation arises. You can see how I have used a couple of tunnels for this highway, but there is this big stretch that is just highway, and it kind of just looks a little weird in this area. So I decided to make this whole area tunnel. And like I said, it's going to poke up every now and again, the highway, but a big chunk of it is actually going to be underground. And I kind of like this because I think that it's going to be a nice flow of traffic. We're going to have a lot of people still using this road, this main road that sits above it. You can see where the highway has followed a lot of the road pattern, the road structure of the one that sits above. And it's not massively intrusive. It's sort of just hidden in a way, the highway. It's just sort of tucked away in little areas. But I kind of like where it sits. It's a little bit different to what I usually do, and it's nice. It's a nice change. I'm really enjoying the change working on an Australian series, because I mostly do American, and I'll still love, you know, working within the context of American cities, but I'm just really also enjoying working within the mindset of an Australian city. It just feels very homely, feels very nice, feels very relevant to me. And I do know there's a lot of people who watch my channel. Like, I think a lot of people subscribed when I was doing the last Australian series. So hit me up if you're enjoying this new change of pace, something a little bit different to a lot of the other stuff that I've been producing over the years. Hit me up. I'll always love to find out. All right, so that highway has pretty much done its thing within the city, and now I'm starting to think about whereabouts it's going to be connecting up to the rest of the areas. So we're gonna have one stretch of the highway going along the coastline. It's pretty much well established out that way, but we'll start working on that much later on down the track. Something that you guys been just wanting me to use for forever, and that's the node controller mod. And this is me downloading it and then going, like, let's just have a little play. And I just decided to record all this footage, but looking back on this, it's pretty garbage. I don't really make anything noteworthy. Actually, now that I remember what this thing looks like at the end, it's pretty bad. So yeah, this is just me having a little crack at it. I'm definitely going to need a little extra time working on it, but yeah, no controllers installed. I'm going to use it for sure. The idea behind this intersection is I wanted it to be where the highway sort of finally meets a road, and there's probably going to be a bit of traffic banked up around here, but that's fine. You know, sometimes it happens. And I feel like a lot of highways within Sydney do this. You'll be on a highway and you're like, sweet, I'm going to get there in no time. And then all of a sudden you meet one of these main roads, and then all of a sudden you're on traffic lights. So I don't know. I just thought, sticking with the truth of Sydney, this is what we get. So this is what my Sims get too. And for this highway, I'm sort of imagining that this is one of the more recent additions to the city. So I reckon around this area, I'm going to have what looks like more recent development. And potentially we might even have some construction sites. I mean, this is all theoretical. Maybe we don't do this. Let me know if you have any ideas. But it might be kind of cool to see how this city is expanding and where the highways are slowly starting to be developed. I know that highways are usually developed in a way that they do it in chunks. So they do one project over a course of a couple of years, and you can obviously use that road and use it to what that is at the moment. And then the next expansion happens. So, you know, maybe we do it in sort of expansions. Maybe we can sort of show where the highway is eventually going to sit and where it is currently and who's it currently serving. I think that'd be kind of interesting, so let me know if we end up doing something like that, because I think it would be sort of fun. I've left room to potentially do things like that. So I reckon this highway is a fairly new development. So all the houses and everything around here are going to be looking like they've been recently changed, and maybe there's some extra parks. Because I know that in Australia, at least, whenever there's some sort of new development, there's always some addition to parkland or green space. So, you know, maybe we show that there is that dedication to in this city. So I mentioned earlier about Gladesville Bridge and how you can see the remnants of the old bridge, and the new one is just sitting just adjacent to it. It's just opposite it. So I thought I would do something similar. I do want there to be that storyline in my city where you can see the old and where the new is. And I really love that part about driving over the Gladesville Bridge. Now I look at it every time I drive over the bridge. So I thought I'd include something like that as well. So I've just dragged the road over the other side just so it matches up exactly where it is. And you can see where the old bridge is, whatever we end up calling this area. Hit me up if you do have some names, but I just sort of like that addition. And we'll do a few more of that sort of stuff, you know, down the track as we work on this city. For the last little part, we're back where this whole episode started. It's kind of funny, we've done a full circle. But I wanted to just finish up around the farmland area, because this is where, you know, you're going to see the expansion of the city happen, and where the roads are going to be really showing their age, I reckon. So for instance, this highway, you can see how now it stretches on a completely different path. And the road that we end up dragging out this way when I finish working on this river that I forgot that I worked on this episode. But yeah, you'll see how the old roads once stretched in a different area, and then they've actually changed the location of the main bulk of traffic. And I was inspired to do this from the highway that stretches up to the Blue Mountains. There's this highway that I'm so used to taking, but you know, on that website, checking out how this area has changed, you can actually see that even back in the 70s, you would take a different road to get up to the Blue Mountains. You'd actually take this old Great Western Highway that took a slightly different direction, and you can still see where they've used old infrastructure to build the new highway, and then you can also see the remnants of the old bridge that used to stretch along this way, and it's just so interesting. I really love finding out about that sort of history. And you only really ever really notice until you see like a tiny little remnant, and then you go, oh, that's totally where that used to be. So in a similar fashion, I am building the old road that goes into the city, and this one actually leads directly up to that main road that we're working on just before with the messy interchange. And because this is like the old road, we will have a little town that sits out here. It's just like just out of the main city, and it'll be really, really small, very, very, very tiny. And because we have all that, I figured this is probably where the train line would most probably go, because train lines are some of the oldest infrastructure of the city, so I did want to show that path along that way, rather than going along the same stretch as the highway. And you can just see how everything is just starting to really fit into place, and I think that's going to really show within the cinematics, where you can see that roads have a real purpose within the city. They don't just go in a direction because, you know, why not? They all go in directions that I think are fairly realistic. So I hope that really shows. And if you do have some suggestions for me, please hit me up in the comments section. I am always appreciative of ideas for the city, and I'm keen to get working on it, because next week we're going to be finally working on some buildings. We're placing down the downtown and figuring out where the big chunk of some of those bigger places are going to go. Before I skedaddle, I do want to give a shout out to some of the oldest patrons of the channel, the older supporters: Booster, Mike Breeden, Nick Garn, Andreas Hepp, Christopher C. Penny, John Van Gert, and Oliver Assis. Thank you guys for your long-time support of the channel. Thank you all so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye!